Hello, my name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books Podcast, episode number 195. Uh, from our document today, and I quote, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. That opening is from one of the greatest founding documents, if not the greatest founding document to ever start a nation in the history of humanity. This year, 2026, marks the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the document that kicked off this wild experiment that we're all running on a third of the North American continent, from sea to glorious shining sea. No other country, not one, anywhere else in the world, is attempting to replicate the model that the Declaration of Independence proposes. To quote from the second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And with that, we're off. During the drafting of this document in that very hot summer of 1776 in Philadelphia, it was not seen as being idealistic as it is seen now looking back. It was seen as being realistic. It was seen as revolutionary, not just for the words in the document, but also for the challenge that it cast down to the heads of the British system of parliamentary government and monarchical rule, and for the challenge it cast at the feet of all those European nations who would follow in its wake, most notably the French and their revolution, which started in 1789, right about the time the Americans wrapped up their own constitutional convention after fighting a 7-year revolutionary war against the greatest naval military at that time. The great challenge of this document has been pushed, prodded, questioned, doubted, and debated ever since. And the great question of this document is this: can faiths, ethnicities, races, classes of people actually in lived practice exist together in one unified nation without warring, without fracturing and breaking apart, without factionalizing, without tribalizing, and all while pursuing, that's a key word, but not maybe ever actually getting happiness? This has been the grand question that we have bet this entire experiment on. And the founding fathers themselves doubted that it would even last 20 years after it was out of its cradle, after the Constitutional Convention, much less for the last 250. On the show today, this is our ode, our discussion, our hagiography, our contribution to the myth making, but also our questioning and our probing and our prodding of, as I said before, what I consider, quite frankly, to be the greatest document the greatest, most revolutionary document any human beings have ever put together, outside of perhaps the Bible. Today, we are going to talk about in depth the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers. By the way, we're also going to talk about the Federalist arguments and the Anti-Federalist arguments around the Declaration of Independence, because those arguments do matter. Leaders, the rules of the game are going to be different in the 21st century. I mean, we're already a quarter century into the 21st century, and things have changed enormously. But the motives and the hearts of the players in this game on this third of a continent, we have to watch out for them, because they will remain as venal as ever. And of course, back for his usual sojourn to the founding documents of the American Republic, and of course, a discussion about what a republic actually means, our co-host today, who just talked with us last about Coleman Hughes's explosive book, which we also covered on this show in February of this year, The End of Race Politics, Arguments for a Colorblind America, quite appropriate to talk about on the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country. That book was authored by Coleman Hughes, the best friend of the show. And now, by the way, we need to publicly acknowledge this, a jiu-jitsu blue belt, an official jiu-jitsu blue belt, Dorollo Nixon Jr., Esquire. Dorollo, how you doing today? How's it going? Oh, Dorollo, you just lost your audio. Where's your audio? Can't hear your audio. Still can't hear your audio. Oh. All right. 3, 2, 1.
Oh,
how you doing, Dorollo? Oh. So what, before we get into the Declaration of Independence, what does it feel like to do something that like 90% of the people who like start jiu-jitsu never do?
Oh, it's great. It's always a shock. Every promotion has shocked me. I remember getting my first stripe three years ago, something like that. But yeah, it's always a shock. And so two of my sons were being promoted. I knew that. And they knew it was coming. They didn't know it was coming that day. I did. Nobody told me, hey, by the way, they're going to promote you too. No one told me. And so I asked my wife later, and she's like, no, I didn't know. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. It's always a shock. And of course, you then proceed to just get beat up all day, every other session that you have after. And that is how it works. But that's the joys of jiu-jitsu. So
I will tell you, I was shocked as well that I got a blue belt. I told my instructor, number one, I don't want a blue belt. Don't you give me any of those colored belts. I want to be a white belt forever. Just keep adding stripes on to the end. I don't care. White belt forever, never be promoted. That's number one. And number two, I'm on the 15-year plan. So most people are on the 10-year plan, the 12-year plan. I'm old for jiu-jitsu. I'm old. So I'm on the 15-year plan. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not one of these 20-year-old kids out here thinking I'm going to go to the UFC. I got responsibilities. I got to do a job in the morning. I got to be able to walk through the airport without looking like I just went to Fight Club. So I'm going to take my time. I'm going to do the things, but don't you dare promote me. And then when he promoted me, he laughed in my face as he tied the thing on me. And he says to me, your entire 15-year plan is now blown up. And I'm like, no, it's not. I'm still on 15. I don't know what your plan you're on, but my plan is still 15 years. I don't know what your plan is. And I got my third stripe earlier this year, so I'm a 3-stripe blue belt now. And so the door, I can see the door at purple belt. I can see the door from here.
So I was sitting in line saying to myself right beforehand, so you understand, Dorollo, you need to get your blue belt before you turn 50. So I'm like, all right, I got about 2 more years, a little bit more. That's literally what I was thinking about. And then the professor says, and we have one more promotion in the family. And I started laughing, and he's like, stop, stop. Because I was like, Who? No, no, no. Right. Just and the whole, you know me, so the whole panoply
Oh
of
yeah.
my emotional reactions to everything. Yeah, we found out from reading a spreadsheet that, as an aside, we found out from reading a spreadsheet that I won another Social Security client's case. And so I
Mhm.
started like screaming, and my new assistant is like freaking out because she's never heard me react to, oh, look, this guy had a terrible case and we won. Yes, just like screaming. And she's like, oh, yeah, oh, okay. It was really, really funny. But it's me. So, yep.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so, yeah.
the percentages on people who make it through blue belt, as I
Mm-hmm.
texted you, the blue belt blues are a real thing.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
I have actually yelled at people. I did this in between my first stripe and my second stripe, and it almost impacted me getting my second stripe. But I actually yelled at everybody because I have a small school. It's not a Gracie school; it's an independent school, but we're affiliated with Six Blades, out of Fort Worth, and I actually did one night. Like it was going so badly for me, and I had enough, and it had been going badly for me for like a while. And I'm like, why am I showing up here? Which is a typical blue belt thought. And why isn't any of my stuff working? Which is also a typical blue belt thought. And this guy who's a purple belt has been like, killing me for like the last like year. And I hate this guy. Like I viscerally hate him. And we started at the same time. And it's not,
Uh-huh.
it's a deep interpersonal hatred.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, why am I here? And I yelled at everybody. Why am I here? I hate all of you. Um, Screw you guys. I might have used a different word. Um, I'm going to curse all of you when I get in my car, and I'll be back on Thursday.
And that's what makes all the difference. I can think of people who aren't there, and I don't know why. People
Mm-hmm.
where I remember when we were all white belts, and now they're, some a year, some longer, being
Mm-hmm.
blue belts for like 2 years. And I remember when we were all rolling, we were all white belts. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know where they are. And it's just like,
Right.
what are you guys doing? Like you guys were good. One of them is the best practitioner I've ever seen. And I think his is just injuries.
Yeah.
And I see him often enough. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, technically he's in my phone. I know how to find him. It's just, you
Yeah.
know, it's a subject I don't necessarily want to bring up, but it's like, oh, it's been a bit, but you know, you just wonder like what's the deal. But yeah, but you keep going back. The reason I don't expect the blues to come is because the goal is just, hey, if I could make purple in half the time, I'd be happy, because it was almost 4 years to
Yeah.
get to blue. I'm like, I'm good. I got 2 years. That don't care about stripes. I almost did that stupidly arrogant thing and didn't even have a card. I'm just like, no, I'm good. Like they will know when, and I will just keep showing up and trying to learn. And then I was like, no, just take the card
No,
out.
just take the card out. Just track your progress. They don't know. They
Yes.
don't
Yeah.
know.
You
You
don't
have
need
a
Apple Pay. Just take the card
Yeah.
out. Here
Just
it
take
is.
the card out.
Yep. Here it is.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh. Well, congratulations.
Thank
Like
you.
I said,
Yep.
this is welcome to the suck. As I say to every blue
Yep.
belt, welcome to the suck. And you know, like your technique will get better and better and better because you'll
Mhm.
start like blue belt's the point where you start, and I've had this experience now as a blue belt, like you start putting together things and you start having aha moments and you start like
Mhm.
seeing things. Like we've been working on an entire, this is deep inside baseball, folks, and yes, we will get to the Declaration of Independence after Dorollo and I wrap this up. But um I was working on what was we working on this week or this month? We were working on the moves from from half guard. That's what it was.
Mhm.
Yeah, moving from
Mhm.
half guard and slipping and turning and going underneath and all that. Um and then deep half, like working deep half and like getting really up underneath somebody. I would not have been able to do that 2 years ago or even understood like why I need that. And
Mhm.
now in roles, I was saying this to the guy the other day, who by the way is the same purple belt that was like killing me like a year ago. Um he hates deep half. And so now I found something that he hates. I did look at him and I said, I'm now going to use this on you all the time.
Yep.
And he goes, go ahead. And he's like in his mid 30s and he's on the TRT and he's got the stack and the whole thing. He's the classic, like roided up purple belt. And using the peptides and the whole 9 yards, and just 15 years, well, no, 12 years younger. It's the whole thing.
Joys of being in your mid
You
30s.
guys are being in
Just
your mid
wait,
30s.
buddy. Just wait.
That's right. That's right. He's like, oh well, go ahead. That's like the geriatrics move. And I just said, well, that's just because you can't defend it. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But I'm seeing that move everywhere, right? I'm seeing it in roles. I'm seeing it in stand up. I'm seeing where I can apply it from the ground. And that's the thing that starts to gradually, as I call it, the sun gradually starts to rise in your brain as a blue belt. And I don't have a game. Don't get me wrong, folks. Like if you're listening to this right now, I know you did not expect to tune into jiu-jitsu talk. But I have no game. I'm just out here. I'm like the Joker. I'm out here doing things. Like it's fine. But it's gradually coming to where I can see the patterns of things that I have built over time. And it's been because it's been like 4 or 5 years now doing this. So, after 5 years, you should be able to see patterns of something if you've been paying attention. So, anyway, good deal. Well, let's talk about American myths. Let's open up the door with this. So Benjamin Franklin is often quoted, right? When we talk about the Declaration of Independence. And Elizabeth Willing Powell asked him in that summer of Philadelphia after they signed the Declaration of Independence, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? And Benjamin Franklin's famous response is a republic, if you can keep it. And the libertarians among us, on this 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, would assert, and I sent a link to Dorollo for this article for the Mises Institute, which sort of had it summed up, had libertarian thought summed up in as tight a package as I've seen in a while. Basically, they assert that because of the nature of the changes to the Republic after the Civil War and into the progressive movement, we actually no longer represent the original Republic that was proposed in the Declaration of Independence and that was codified in the Constitution, that we are closer to something like what the French have, which is like a sixth republic. And that, quite frankly, our republic is more socialist and progressive than it is Republican and small d democratic. The progressives, however, for their part, would argue that we've never been a republic at all. As a matter of fact, this is the Howard Zinn, argument that it's always been just moneyed interests, and it was just a bunch of rich agrarian guys who got together and declared independence because England was going to either cut off their money or cut off their slaves or cut off both. And how dare they do that? Okay. Oh, yeah, that's the Howard Zinn, argument. The religious among us would argue, and this is happening right now in Protestant religious circles in America, if you haven't been paying attention, the religious among us would argue that we've been a fundamentally Christian republic and that we were Christian from the founding. We've always been Christian, and that we only started to go off the rails when we lost our Christian spine. And the atheistic would argue that the religious language that was founded or that was deeply embedded in the founding and actually is deeply embedded in the Declaration of Independence, the atheistic among us would argue that that was merely lip service, merely the flapping from unscientific minds, as Richard Dawkins would say, who were drunk on philosophical ideas and didn't know enough about science and were fools. By the way, if you ever have an opportunity to listen to Dawkins, you'll realize just what a really arrogant and scared man he actually is.
Fitting.
Mm-hmm. What about Psalm 14?
So, the arrogance of what do they call them? The new atheists or something like that. They all get like that. Dr. Tyson gets like that. They all get like that. But that's what Psalm 14 says, that they will be like that. And so there you go. Yes, it's quite frustrating. And I mean, some of them will almost foam at the mouth, right? In their vehemence. And it's like, all right, buddy, just wait. Just wait.
Well, and America is a big enough country to encompass all of them, right? To encompass all of us. And so they also all contribute to the myth of America, all those ideas. And they are part and parcel. All these ideas are part and parcel of building what is the American myth. And so I want to start off with this idea for Dorollo today. Are we actually in a sixth republic, or are we in a continuous republic, warts and all?
So I appreciate what you sent, Hasan, because I hadn't thought about it that way about the American Republic. And when I started reviewing the article, I thought, okay, I'm not going to agree with this. And I got through it and I said, you know what? That's actually an interesting point. Wow, hey, maybe. And so you start thinking about it. So I started writing down years to figure out, okay, so what years did I think, the Republic shifted, right? Because
Mhm.
a previous iteration for me was, oh, it's just, it's the same Republic. It's just version 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0. And I'm going to talk about France in a second. But so I first thought, oh, okay, well, what would my years be? So I said, okay, let's start with 1781. End of the Revolutionary War, Treaty of Paris, great, already in the Articles of Confederation, but how well do they have to function when you're just trying to stay alive? You're just busy trying to slaughter the British and the Hessians and anybody else who showed up, except the French and the Spanish who helped us. So it's like, okay, great. Let's start with 1781. Then 1790. So 1790, we've passed and ratified the U.S. Constitution. We have our first actual our first Congress, right? The first Congress, 1789. And in 1790, I believe was the passage, 1790 or 1791. I think it was 1791, the passage of the Bill of Rights, right? Okay, great. First 10 amendments, wonderful. That seems like another watershed moment. So I said 1790. Then, and of course, this is part of history and part of thinking. You have to figure out among all of these options, can I group them? How do I group them in a way that they're few and significant rather than, oh, well, there's 12. No, there's really only about 3 to 5 years are critical and not 12. This is what I originally thought. So I would skip from 1790, 1791 to 1865. Say, okay, so now we have been through this new birth of freedom, and we are trying to do government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and have it not perish. And we came through this hellish, initiation of a civil war, right? Okay, great. So 1865 is obviously another watershed moment. But then I jumped to 1933 with the New Deal. And then up from there, 1988, it's the end of Reagan, and the beginning of the 89, the beginning of the fall of communism, etc. And then I went to 2001. And then I let some time go by, and then I realized, hey, wait a minute, the way this pattern seems to be, perhaps like with an earthquake, is it seems like there's an anticlimax and then the actual climax. And so then I started trying to find pairs of years that were close, that to me better communicated the notion that, oh, okay, is this really fundamental, or is it the forerunner to what was fundamental? So I reshuffled the years. So then, for example, 1777, the passage of the Articles of Confederation. So now we have our actual first republic. Great. The framing document, which obviously was a failure, but we who have all come afterwards cannot but view the articles without also seeing the Constitution that was developed, and which, of course, was a truly revolutionary act because it was illegal, right? It was an illegal framing of a new government to replace an existing government. It was more revolutionary than the war. But anyway, so now I've got 1777 and 1787. That to me it's that is, hey, now we're getting our first two republics, right? Because the first one that was illegally replaced by a much better one. But then I'm like, I still am comfortable moving from that all the way through to 1865. But, and this is interesting, certainly as an African American, de la vieille souche, right, whose family had been here and in slavery and all that nonsense in the South, pairing 1865 with 1876 and seeing the major changes of the Civil War being significant, but for the Republic itself, it had to include the shift with the end of Reconstruction. Because then I set up a block of decades that have a coherence and that functioned a certain way, right? And of course, north of one line, it was now we're going to get progressivism and the real throes of industrialism happening, which was all during those years, but also the horrible betrayal that Jim Crow was also then coming and staying. And so I think that pairing 1865 and 1876 together works. So it's like there's this first anticlimax and then this actual the shock, the earthquake, the climax. And then the next 2 years, it's 33 and 45. I left out 45 originally, and I was troubled by that because there were a lot of changes that happened in 1945. And so it wasn't just the rise of the welfare state with the New Deal. That was the anticlimax. We had the beginnings of a globalized government by the United States with a globalized industrial economy starting circa 1945. And so it's like, okay, 45's got to be in there. So now we got those 2 years. And then we have, and this one is kind of weird, 74 with that first President Nixon resigning, right? That wasn't the real crisis. That was the anticlimax. The real crisis was the end of the Carter administration, right? And then here comes Ronald Reagan, who was going to set a paradigm that would actually last for 20 years exactly. And so 74 and 81. And so it's almost like, to choose a different metaphor, it seems like it's like a labor period, right? That the American Republic is laboring during those years and then births the new version. And then the new version lasts, in this case, almost a generation. 81 to 2001. And then you have the anticlimax of 9/11, but the real climax, which was, oh, we're going to invade Iraq. So what we're going to do is spend a lot of money and now be involved in the Middle East again on scale. That to me is the real, that's the earthquake. And 9/11 and its response in Afghan, a few months later was like the anticlimax. And so I still see that one as remaining. But that was a very good article. Thank you. Because, there are different elements that go into defining the shift from one Republican quotation marks to the next, right? But what I see is, and this is from the second article that you talked about, the one about with the generational labels, it basically is like an 80-year crisis or 80 years to a crisis. And then what I saw is to make it actually epochal, or changing a Republican quotation marks again, the crisis has to lead to some fundamental change in the citizens' expectation of the federal government. So that's the thing I'm looking for. So if we just limited it to the 20th century, yes, adding income tax permanently is there. Okay, the Fed, okay, but that's nothing like New Deal. New Deal was a watershed. It was one of the strongest changes in the citizens' expectation of the federal government ever. But it doesn't end there, because then when we get to 1945, we now have a truly national federal government that has a strong footprint other than the post office all over the country and is doing things all over the world. And a large part of the citizens that fits the citizens' expectation. We expected the US government to be able to beat the Nazis and beat Japan. That's just what we expected. Well, you had to grow to 100 times the size to do that. We didn't care about that and didn't think about the implications to our rights of that. We just thought, hey, we expect you to beat, or we expect us, excuse me, because they were largely involved. There was like 16, 17 million veterans during that time frame. Okay. There were 16 to 17 million service members during that time frame who then became veterans. And so we are going to beat the Nazis and we are going to beat the Japanese. Great. Okay. Expectations of government. And so the shift, the fundamental change in the expectation of the federal government then has to lead to new social arrangements and new institutions. And so that's how we see on the ground in a non-wartime setting, a different set of behaviors working among the citizens to show, hey, this republic is different than this republic. And it's easy to think about if you just contrast centuries, right? And so there obviously was a reasonable, this is going to sound so funny, there was a reasonable expectation of slavery prior to 1865. And so it's like, okay, there's a social institution and pernicious and evil, but there, okay. And so that expectation and its necessary working out of those social arrangements, that was the fabric of most of the most of the 19th century, right? So you flip it, 100 years, and all of a sudden it's like we have different social institutions, we have different expectations, we have, new laws being framed to enforce a different set of expectations that began to arise from 1948. Really, 1945 works, but 1948 through 1965, right? That period of labor. But anyway, yeah. And then, of course, it has to follow with growth. And
Hmm.
so, therefore, and it's weird because I'm conservative, and I'm an anti-progressive, right? And
Hmm.
so I'm conservative in the sense that the traditional social institutions and arrangements, obviously barring slavery, work with me. And thus, I'm not a libertarian saying, give me my rights and the rest of you can just go step off my land or I'll shoot you. No. But I think that's better than progressivism, but still,
Yeah.
like there's a social framework and a set of obligations that preceded us that helped frame us, and that's what I'm trying to pass on to my kids, and that's what
Mhm.
makes me conservative. But anyway, well, that's not what makes me. That's a function of my conservatism. But anyway, growth is must necessarily follow these changes, or the republic is really in trouble. And so, where our republic arguably differs from, say, La Grande République, the French, right? Okay, the French Republic, of which there are five. And there is talk that I've seen even in 2026 of, hey, do we need a sixth republic? And I think they do. And one of the reasons I can say that is I don't see growth now, and I don't see growth for years there really being sustainable. And just it's not happening. Okay, so then there's some fundamental crisis not being dealt with that needs to be dealt with, and that should help them labor and then birth a new republic. But they're not there. Whereas with us, just look at the last one, that shift from 2001, that brief labor, probably because it was the sixth kid, but 2000, sorry, the fifth kid, 2001 to 2003. Okay, now we're still dealing with that. We're 23 years later, and what we're used to is, well, look at the new institutions. Social media is an institution in that republic, right? Mail-in voting is an institution in that republic, and Republican air quotes still, and the that fits how we Zoom. What we're doing right
Hmm.
now is an institution in that republic. Okay,
Hmm.
and it thankfully does not appear at present that we're laboring through a COVID shift to a seventh one. Okay, and so I'm happy about that because that was a disaster, and I don't see that shift being positive, right? But we may be around time for another change. I'd love to see, and it's interesting also because the time frame that I chose, right? 1865-76 to 1933-1945 almost exactly corresponds to the Third French Republic, okay, which ran from 1871 to 1940. And so it was long, it was stable. There's much in French culture that was produced by and under the aegis of that republic. But of course, there was a grievance. Okay, the Prussians unified Germany. They took two French provinces, and of course, being a Francophile, I'm going to call them French provinces, Alsace-Lorraine. And so that was sticking in the craw of all those Frenchmen. And so they made sure they got them back, and then lost two-thirds of their country in 1940 to the invading Nazis, and then succeeded with help in kicking them out 4 years later. But you know, they had a long, I think it was about 70 years. They had a long, fertile time frame to do French culture, and so if you think of painting and art, and very and other French institutions, you can date them to that time frame. The real revolutionary tumult was ended around 1870, 1871. They've been through two emperors, I believe, three sets of French monarchs from the same family, right? And they were solidly Republican from that point forward. Republican small r, solidly
Okay.
Republican from that point forward. So, yeah.
Okay. So that is a good sort of an overall analysis of this idea of, or the answer to the question, are we on a sixth republic, or
Mhm.
is it just a continuous thing? And I find it interesting your time frames and tying it into, and we'll talk about Strauss and Howe's generational theory here a little bit later, because that ties into where I think we're going in a post 2026 world order. Because I actually think that we are at the beginning, to your point about birthing, I
Mhm.
think we are in the process of birthing a new 80-year cycle, a new seculum
Mhm.
cycle for America. And I think that that new seculum cycle is in the birth process right now and will become fully formed right around 2030. It's going to pop out around 2030. And then it will just be, well, it'll be a seculum high. Actually, I believe it'll be a high mark, not a low mark, not a fourth turning. I actually believe and that's one of the points of this podcast. We're moving out of a fourth turning. We are moving through that birthing period. I love how you framed that, and then we are moving into we're moving into a high. But it is not going to be a high that is going to look like the post World War II high, which we all have historically in our brains, and we all, and by we all I mean Republican, Democrat, centrist policymakers, pundits, entertainers. Just it's a cultural assumption that the 1950s will somehow show back up again magically. And if we're looking for that, we will miss we will miss the high. But anyway, we'll get to that in just a second. Follow-up question to all that, because that was all really good. Do people, and I would think that the folks at the Mises Institute would argue with you about this, but do you think the average citizen with their changed expectations understands exactly what a republic is anymore? Your voice is dropped out again. One more time. Nope, not yet. Don't have it yet. Have it yet.
Back on.
There it is.
Excellent. Not even close.
I hear you now.
Excellent. Not even close.
Not even close. Okay.
Right. Not even close. Now, you can argue that that has been the intention of the most virulent part of the leftist higher education um, cartel, right? Cabal, because conspiracy is too weak. But that's what they've been doing, right? They've been
Mm-hmm.
trying to get people who are reasonable, who are inquiring, and who have moved beyond the rudiments of education. They've been trying to fool them into agreeing to that Marxist dialectic. And so they have to get them to be Marxist, they have to get them one way or the other to dispense with the Republic, to dispense with the notion that no, we are a bunch of interrelated citizens who have these rights and power really does reside with us. And therefore, and there's other parts of this presupposition, but therefore, I need not fear guy over there who has all this money or woman over there who like would be a genius at politics, a genius. And so when people say to me, okay, can you please explain to me why you support Donald Trump? All I got to do is show this woman's photo and say, just ask your daughter about her,
Mm-hmm.
right? Taylor Swift, ask your daughter about
Mm-hmm.
her. Okay. If she said, I want to be emperor of the world, your daughter's going to vote for her like this right away. No thought involved. And your wife probably would too. And there's something to that. But in a republic, I don't have to fear that. I don't have to concern myself with how she has such influence or how this other guy is sitting on a pile of money. I don't have to concern myself with that in a republic. It's not a threat to me. As I love to do, I quote that famous Black American capitalist, James Brown, right? The way I like it, hey, is the way it is. I got mine. Don't worry about his. And when I heard it, my ears rang and I sat up in the car and probably hit my head on the roof and said, "Hey, did you hear that? James Brown just told us he's a capitalist. He has zero problem with somebody else making money because he understands you got your rights, do your thing. I'm going to do mine. We're good." And so it frustrates me because um, that's just lost, and not just lost because three generations have been lied to by leftists in higher ed. Your average American does not understand what a republic is, that we live in one, why they're important, why they're precious, why, for example, the founders may have thought maybe this will last 20 years, because it depends on how we behave. And if we either behave badly, which is an actual thing, right? Bad behavior as distinguished from poor behavior. Okay, bad behavior is an actual thing. If we behave badly, we can lose our republic. Or worse, if we're just unwilling to put in the effort or are hoodwinked into thinking that not only do we not need to, but it's really somebody else's job, then we will silently shift into, right? What is it called? It's the title of his book. Not slouching to whatever to slavery. It's the title of his book.
Oh, yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hayek's book. The Road to Serfdom.
The Road to Serfdom.
Right. The Road to Serfdom. The road to that slippery path to slavery that is paved not by good intentions, but paved by somebody is enabling your laziness. Somebody is enabling you not to show up.
Okay. Then let me straw man or steel man the Marxist dialectic argument.
Yep.
When we're talking about socialism, we're not talking about Russia or China, the bad socialism. We're talking about the socialism that's built off of what Marx actually intended it to be off of, which is the next stage of capitalism. And so because we are already capitalistic, because we've reached the height of late stage capitalism, we can actually successfully build socialism. And why would you object? Because we've seen it work in other countries like France and England and Germany, all those countries you've named, specifically like France, who might be onto a sixth or seventh republic. And that's fine, but it will be a socialist republic. And we can actually do that because we're smarter than those people were 100 years ago. We know more about human nature. We know scientifically and psychologically and by human behavior. You mentioned social media. We can track what people actually click on and what they actually pick. And we have data that shows what choices people actually make. And so we can actually manage and move the economy in a way that actually helps people. And why would you be opposed to more people being raised up? Why would you be opposed to the workers owning the means of production? Dorollo, you're a venal capitalist. And by the way, when it comes time to go to the barricades, when it comes time to construct, and not even construct, when it comes time to crack some eggs, we won't be doing it with a gulag. We won't be doing it with concentration camps. That was the bad old days. That was the 20th century. Instead, what we will do is we will cancel you and we will shut you up and we will, because you cannot go along. And by the way, America was never, from its founding, anything but a pit of capitalist greed. And we are just restoring the minority. We're restoring the downtrodden. We are restoring the woman to where they needed to be. And by the way, not only are you a running dog capitalist, but you've also somehow managed to imbibe the politics of white supremacy and patriarchy. You're a walking white supremacist, Dorollo. How could you do that? We are moving towards a glorious socialist future. And by the way, it's not just us that's promising this. Sam Altman is promising this. The guys who run Anthropic, even Elon Musk has proposed a universal basic income. So how can you sit there and propose that we can't do socialism? How can you propose? This is just another lie from a reactionary person who just won't go along with the future.
To say, go ask Trevor Noah.
What would we ask?
Go ask Trevor Noah.
Oh, but Trevor Noah, Trevor Noah, of course, came from a socialist country, and he would like to see that replicated here. And we're in a much better position to do that than in South Africa.
He doesn't want to see it replicated here. He escaped that post-apartheid party, okay? And that man, as he says in his own, media, right? He works really hard. because we were poor, right? That's how he says it. I don't know how you spell poor, but in our English, poor. We were poor. So he works really hard. And so try selling him on your socialist dream salad. It's not going to work because he knows better. The next thing would say, oh, okay, great. So please tell me your job. Because the things I like to focus on, one of the things I like to focus on when it comes to political economy is, okay, you can divide jobs into people who are talking and people who are producing something. And so to the extent that we move away from production to more talk, we're getting on more and more dangerous ground. One of the reasons that a great American like Thomas Jefferson from 2 centuries ago would call himself a farmer was that it was something that they could be proud of, that, hey, we are in the earth producing something. And of course, his production 100% was done by other people who weren't compensated. It was still a link to production. So at least they got the connection to production right. If they had just freed the people and said, hey, I want to give you this job, here are wages. Do you agree? And then they negotiated, we wouldn't complain, right? We wouldn't complain about it. We justly call it unjust because it was, but that link to production, though, was something that for them was axiomatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something that when I think through these issues, it's something that concerns me because we had tons of production in 1950, and circa 1970 we started to get away from production. And I understand some of the motives and some of that about efficiencies and whatever, that can all be true, great, but at the end of the day, I'm sitting on something that was produced. This laptop is sitting on something else that was produced. There's a door I'm looking at, it's metal that somebody produced. And so somebody is still producing things that we need to make our lives work the way we want to. And so we should be making them here, and we can. And if we need to change some things to encourage that, fine. Like, that's politics I would support. But I think about that. And so back to this socialist dreamer who inevitably is either age 22 or age 82. It's either girl who just got out of wherever she's got the petition on the street trying to get you to sign while you're on your break. You have 15 minutes before you're strapped to the desk, and she's harassing you about her petition about whatever, okay? Or it's Senator Bernie Sanders. It's one or the other, okay? Find me those middle-class socialists with families. You don't. You don't. You'll find them without families. And you can find some, okay, there's some with families, but I just think that you can hit a level of middle-class reality where the elusiveness of what they're trying to sell is just not elusiveness. The illusion of what they're trying to sell is just, you can see it. You can see their city on a hill, and you're like, I'm standing in an actual city on a hill, and you're trying to tell me it's over there. Why is your hand in the till? You're trying to tell me it's over there. Get your hand out of my pocket. You're trying to get out of my room. What do you do? Right. That's what's happening. Okay. The great, what do they call it? The big steal, the great steal. Mm-hmm. It's frustrating because it's so, you can see transparently what it is, and yet it's so strong of a force. That's what's frustrating, where it's just like, look at the track record. Oh, but it wasn't how Marx implemented it. So why did so many people implement it some other way that wasn't Marx, but was consistently? There's a coherent pattern, which is take my rights, oppress me, and then we have Animal Farm. That's the coherent pattern. Animal Farm, by the way, written by a socialist who had really clear vision, okay, and who thought that tyranny was a greater enemy, and he was correct, and who also loved English culture, capital E, small c, loved English culture, which is interesting because he was born in India. It was really interesting. But Eric Blair, because of his love of Englishness and his hatred of tyranny, I think it helped him see clearly and be able to critique even the institutions of his own politics, which I don't know people on the right who really do that. I don't know good criticism who can say to us, to our credit, yeah, now we sound like a bunch of rabid dogs. Like, no, we sound crazy and unhinged. And we may be right about this, but we're wrong about these other three things.
Right.
So it's like,
right.
hey, we got to We need to rein this in. I'll give you I give you an example I actually like. Okay, MTG,
Yeah.
right? MTG, who sounded, pardon me, she sounded like a raving lunatic until she left, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, you're making sense, and you're clear, and you're whoa, hey, wait a minute, and I love that. I love that kind of turn
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
to me it shows that there's something there. There are other people still in Congress from, say, my former state of New York, where I would love to see them make a turn like that. It's just not happening, and I don't know if it will because of neighborhood effects.
Hmm.
Neighborhood effects means you hang out with a bunch of champagne liberals and you're going to sound like you don't even know how to find us on a map. And that's what happens. So it's like, what do you want?
Hmm.
But, I'm hoping that eventually there's a turn where it's like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I found something and my experience is telling me it's true. And so I'm holding my experience and I'm listening to your rhetoric. And I know that it's hollow. I know that it's empty because I'm holding this kernel of experience that tells me, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. This happened. This is true. This I can build on. It's interesting. Did you see the change that your state made about the Bible in public education?
Yes, indeed, I did, much to the consternation of several of the progressive individuals living in Houston and in Dallas and
Austin
in
and in
Fort
Austin,
Worth and,
probably.
and in Austin.
Yeah.
Well, and
But
some in
it can go
Arizona.
many ways. It can go many ways. Here's
It
the one
could.
I want to mention.
It could.
You can read it in more than one US government building right now
Mhm.
because it's on the walls, or the one I'm referring to, which is in Langley, Virginia. It's on the floor.
Right.
Right. And it's just
Right.
like, okay, so what do we mean then when we say, nope, you can't read it? Like, what do we mean? What do we actually mean? You
So
know?
what we actually mean is, and this is why um I think the LA mayoral race is going to go to the socialist Hindu lady. I think she's actually going to beat
Uh-huh.
Karen Bass. This is why I am unsurprised by the hijacking that's happening in the Democratic Party right now by the new current New York City mayor, Mr. Mamdani. I am unsurprised by the hijacking that's happening because there has always been, going back to the founding itself, there has always been a strain of progressive leftism that clusters itself in a space of wanting to control my neighbor. That was the
Mhm.
loyalists. Those folks were loyalists during the Declaration of Independence and all throughout the
Mhm.
entire time of the revolution. And
Mhm.
then when the revolution was adjudicated and wound up the way that it did, with George Washington basically retreating and deflating into victory, which was kind of amazing. Um, those folks went directly to Canada and became more of the thing they already always were. And if you look at Canada as a nation state, which it claims it's not a nation state, they have gone full throated socialist, and they are living out the fruits of that full throatedness. Well, the strain in our country, we have two strains in our country. I've said this on an episode before with you. We've said we've got the Patrick Henry, to your point, the libertarian Patrick Henry, go the hell away and leave me alone and get off my property or I'll shoot you strain. But we also have a strain in our politics that is deeply progressive, wants to lecture other people, and quite frankly, desires for control. We saw that during COVID. Well, that is concentrated almost exclusively in the Democratic Party. And right now, a purging is going on in the Democratic Party because Marxists and socialists always do. Marxists, communists, and socialists always do purges. They either do socialists do intellectual purges, communists do physical purges, and Marxists do do physical purges first, followed up by an ideological purge, followed up by another physical purge, because that's what Mao showed. That's how Mao showed you could do that. And if you think that I'm being harsh on this episode in stating it this way, I'm not. I've read Chairman Mao's book. I've read the Communist Manifesto, and I read Das Kapital, which most people haven't read because it's an absolute mess. And I know what I'm talking about when these ideas. Oh, and by the way, we've covered Lenin. If you want to go listen to the episode where we covered Lenin's great little memo there on how to organize the opposition, you should go read what these people have actually said and then go look at the behavior of politicians in America over the course of time. And America's always flirted with socialism. I mean, most notably during that period of time between 1933 and 1945, we not only had socialist writers, some of which we've covered on this show, like Sinclair Lewis and others. We also had, because it was a post-World War I era and the Great Depression, we had full-on socialist parties, okay, that were running in America. So socialism is just revisiting our shores, and the Democratic Party, and we'll get back to the Declaration of Independence in just a minute, the Democratic Party is going through a 2-year purge. They are going to purge the centrist and more moderate elements of their party, and they will run screaming and yelling to the Republican Party. I'm calling it right now. When that happens, and they will hold their nose and they will run there because there is no centrist party in America. You just don't have that. That's why we don't have a parliamentary structure. But as it gets more concentrated there, they will look crazier and crazier. And their policies, when they meet reality, like in the case of LA with the homeless problem, or in New York City with rent controlled apartments with 4 angry women with, social science degrees that can't get jobs who voted for Mamdani because he was slick looking and kind of sexy and brown. Well, you're living in your rent controlled apartment that the landlord doesn't take care. I mean, maybe the landlord didn't take care of it before, but now the landlord really isn't going to take care of it. Like, really. And so the results of these things always show up in reality, and that's what defeats, ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what defeats Marxists, that's what defeats communists, and that's what defeats socialists, is reality. But it's a long time to get there. It takes a long time to get there.
Tighten that.
Well, it takes a long time to get there.
It's reality that is experienced, I would say, by a majority of middle-class voters. That's how I would tweak it.
Okay, sure.
Because when I think of the Mamdani thing, what I see, and it's going to sound terrible, but I see a bunch of people who don't live in an economy who are voting this guy in. And I don't know how they eat. I don't know how they do rent. I don't know how they do this. But to me, it does not seem to depend on truck, barter, and exchange. It does not seem to depend on I have to show up and do a job, not for the government, or I can't pay my rent, we get evicted. I can't put food on the table. CPS takes the kids, whatever. Like, they're not living in that kind of exchange. That's not what that's not how they live. They're living in an external or an extra economic fashion, right? Called massive levels of public benefits with no kind of recourse, downside, or accountability. And they're just voting this guy in. And so the reality that you're talking about, fittingly for a reality that's confronting Marxism, is that you can measure that reality economically, right?
Economically, yeah.
So there's a problem then but here are 750,000 voters who just they don't have that reality,
right?
And so they could just keep voting ad infinitum perpetually. Actually, they can't, because I think because I think Mayor Bloomberg got around the cap. So there used to be like a 2-term cap, and Mayor Bloomberg's lawyers got around that, so he had 3 terms as mayor. So I don't know if they fixed that, but who knows? Maybe they fixed it and then they would vote it again, so they can have 3 terms of Mr. Mamdani, whatever. But so again, but that's where I see it. It needs to be tweaked, because heretofore it has hit reality, because there was always some majority, right, of middle class voters at the end of the day who say this stinks, therefore it's garbage, therefore we're throwing it out and we're voting something else in. And so if that never happens, not because they've gone nose blind, but because they have no noses to smell the garbage, they're just going to keep voting the same way,
Well, and I've often thought, I mean, this is my last point on this. I've thought one of the most interesting things in the Bible, one of the most interesting aspects of the Bible, one of the most interesting things in the Old Testament, is the moment in, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's 2 Kings, when Solomon has passed and Rehoboam, his son, comes in. And Rehoboam, the people approach Rehoboam and they say to him, and I'm going to paraphrase this. This is the Jesan version of the King James Bible, so you can go look this up. Please go do this. I believe it's in Second Kings, the first part of Second Kings. Solomon passes First Kings. The First
Yep.
Kings or Second Kings?
I think it's First Kings 13.
First Kings 13. Okay.
I think.
I think. But go read either one of those books. Actually, it's kind of amazing. But
read the whole thing. Just read the whole thing.
Read the whole thing.
Read the whole thing.
Read the whole thing. Read the whole thing. But Rehoboam is approached by the people, and the people say, "We will serve you as Solomon did." But basically just let us know sort of what's the tax going to be, in essence. How much of a weight are you going to place on us? And if you place the same weight on us that your father placed on us, then we will serve you loyally. And now the implicit sort of threat underneath there is, if you do something different, we're going to walk away from you. And so it was a moment of choice for a young Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, of course, did the thing that a king should do, because he was told by his father Solomon that this is a thing you should do, even though he didn't believe it. But the thing he should do is go to his advisors. And so he did. He went to his old advisors, and his old advisors told him basically, don't change anything that your father did, because he was actually going pretty well. And if you keep doing this, everything will be fine. And then Rehoboam turned, and Rehoboam went to, and I don't know why, but this is a terrible maligning way of thinking about this, but he went to his Gen Z and millennial advisors, his friends, his buddies, his peers, and he said to them, hey, what should I do? And his peers go, increase it. Increase the weight on the people, basically. Increase the taxation. Ask them for more. And Rehoboam has a moment of choice, right? And the passage in Kings then skips forward. Rehoboam comes out. I imagine him on this dais coming out, and he proclaims to the people basically, the weight that my father put on you, right, was the thickness of a thumb. But basically, I'm going to increase the weight to the thickness of a thigh. It's framed that way in the King James version, maybe not in the New International Version. I don't know how the language changes. We'll see in a moment. Anyway, the people, of course, do exactly what people will do from time out of mind, which is why the Bible is an amazing book. The people say, as my mother would say, thump that, and they leave. And that was an example of socialism hitting reality. It was an example of tyranny. That you talk about Eric Blair, George Orwell, tyranny hitting reality, and people having freedom of movement to say, no, we're leaving. And that is why the places where these socialist candidates are winning, like Chicago and New York City, and soon to be LA, these are the places where people are, to use Mr. Mamdami's, Mayor Mamdami's language, where the warm embrace of socialism has been extended to people. People are leaving the warm embrace of socialism and going to the cold embrace of capitalism in places like Tennessee and places like, Arizona, where Mr. Nixon is, places like Texas, where I am, places like Florida, where the warm embrace of socialism is not there. And no one, Rehoboam didn't ask himself this question either, because there's actually, weirdly enough, in that book of the Bible, there's no more talk about Rehoboam's internal dialogue anymore after that anywhere else in Kings, which I think is fascinating, by the way. I don't think there was anything there. I think there's a warning there for us in our time, if we are wise enough to listen to it. Moving on, back to the Declaration of Independence. Let's get this back on track. So, Alexander Hamilton got up at the Constitutional Convention. He talked about a plan for national government, and I unfortunately brought I was supposed to bring two books today. I brought the wrong book to reference this. It's in the other book. And so I'm going to just sort of paraphrase. So he got up at the Constitutional Convention and talked about Republican government. He talked about the plan for national government. He talked about sort of how government was going to be constructed and put together in these United States. And he couldn't have had that conversation at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 during that summer. He couldn't have had that without having the Declaration of Independence first. And this is the other brilliance of this document. So the Declaration opens with a principle and a handful of self-evident truths that we all still quote. By the way, whether we're left or right, we quote these to each other all the time, right? And then it does a thing that most leaders skip, right? It spends its entire middle part on evidence. There's a list of usurpations. There's a list of problems. There's a long, specific, tedious bill of particulars against a king. But it's not grievances as feeling, it's grievances as record. It's proving to posterity that this is the thing the king did. um and only then, when the principle was laid over the evidence, does it reach a decision, does it come to a conclusion. And that's the path of the Declaration of Independence: principle, then evidence, and then a final decision, a final conclusion. um the Declaration laid the foundation for the arguments that the Constitution finalized later on. And by the way, ultimately, the amendments also led to finalization, because the Patrick Henry Anti-Federalist folks weren't going to leave because there was nowhere else to go. They were actually going to go to Appalachia, if all things being equal. And so you had to deal with those people, right? And the social arrangements that Dorollo has talked about on this episode that were evidenced in the Constitution were established through that principal evidence decision path that was laid out by the Declaration of Independence. This is why it's a document that's worthwhile for leaders to read. Under pressure, it's really easy, Dorollo, to abandon that path. Why do leaders abandon that sequence under pressure?
Yeah, the replicator is working. So I think it depends first on the type of leader. What I mean is the leader system. So democratic leaders, I think, are more likely, small d actually, are more likely to fall into this trap than autocrats. And yes, they're autocratic leaders, but I think democratic leaders who get their power because a group of people agree to give it to them are more likely to be inclined to cede to the popular will, even when the principle is saying do the opposite, than leaders who do not owe their power to a group of people who are demanding a decision, and so, but that's what I feel. I feel it's just the struggle to deal with the emotions that say these people aren't going to be happy with me. I may lose my power. And all of that goes on one side. And on the other side is, but this is the right thing to do. This is where the principle leads. This is what you say you believe. Are you going to do it? Or even better, this is what God's will, this is what God's word has revealed. So are you going to do it? Right. Do it. Oh, well, here's pressure. Here's suffering. Here's persecution. Yep. You still need to do it. It doesn't change. It doesn't become wrong because you're suffering for it. In fact, the suffering is going to vindicate its rectitude, and this, the ironic sense that life on this fallen earth shows us on a regular basis. So,
well, and I'm glad you said that, because we do live in a fallen world. One of the things that we see in the United States in its development is, and it's been one of the more troubling things over the last, I would say, 25 years that I've seen in the body politic, is an inability of leaders to establish a vision.
uh-huh.
And I think that is crucial. Like, we could talk about all we want about the current president, but I would go back 3 or 4 presidents. I think the last president that probably established a vision was Ronald Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real shame, because without a vision, not to go all biblical again, but it's true, without a vision, the people perish. And we were, while the executive, according to the Constitution, is not a monarch, there's no emoluments, there's no titles, there's no nobility attached to that. He is, and yes, I'm sorry, ladies, for the current time it is a he is the visionary. He has to see the country and establish a vision. I don't even see anybody coming up out of the 4 potential people who might run for president in 2028, and I'm going to name those 4: Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris on the left, and then Marco Rubio and JD Vance on the right. I don't see among that group, of that quartet of personalities, I do not see the capacity to stand in front of a camera or get on social media or whatever and establish a vision, and then to full-throatedly say it. We need that.
You, there's and I think it's a step down, but The alternative is that I think it's only one step down, though. A candidate can embody a vision. A candidate can embody a set of circumstances that people identify with and say that man or that woman. And of course, the reason I say that woman in this context is to me, one of the best examples is literally Taylor Swift, where it's just like, I don't even have to know her politics. Like, it's either yes or no. And the yes or no has nothing to do with political principles or policy decisions that she would make. That's not how it works. That's actually how monarchy functions, like that. It's not about principles or about policy decisions. You literally embody the principle. So cross the Atlantic, cross the pond and go to the UK. And it's just like, why is that guy there on the throne? Because their stability and continuity is what he embodies. And he gets up every day and keeps embodying it. And so why do they not descend into this socialist anarchy, Islamo, Marxist, whatever that they're currently dealing with? Because that guy's sitting there on the throne. That's it. Like, he's there. He embodies 1,000 years of continuity. And he will keep embodying that until he passes away. And then the next person will have a much, 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 much harder task, you know? And so let's cross back to our side of the pond. The big orange-haired guy, he embodies several things. And people are reacting favorably to what he embodies rather than an articulated vision. Now, remember, I said it's a step down, because when you have an articulated vision, you don't even have to embody it. You just declare it and it works. And it's like people take it and they run, and it's beautiful. When I think of casting I mean, the 60s had that, right? So you have, and in fact, because the 60s had it, and because of his age and experience and convictions, then first actor, then governor, then eventually President Reagan, his vision came out of that same era, right? And so he was articulating that vision for almost 15 years before he got into a place where he could then enact it, right? And so that decade had visions, and people could cast visions. President Kennedy cast a vision with his inaugural. It's one of the most beautiful speeches ever written. It's phenomenal. And it inspired an entire generation to change their expectation of the federal government and behave accordingly. And they did, right? They did. They started serving in great numbers. Started serving and not demanding wages competitive with the private sector, right?
But wait a minute. Hold on a second. The people who are in charge of transmitting, distributing the vision, distributing the person who embodies the vision.
Okay.
The media hate the thing, and hate is not too strong a word. They are captured by Trump derangement syndrome currently. Everyone in the media, from the CEO on down, even the folks on the board, they hate this man because of what he, to your point, embodies. And so when they talk about him, when they present him, when they distribute his body to the populace, they always consistently, for the last 10 years, ever since he came down that escalator, they have consistently presented him as, I'm going to use the word, and it's the first time we've used the word on the show in relation to Donald Trump, they consistently portray him as fascist, because that's the vision that they see. How can two fundamental visions of America exist like that? Because the vision that's on the opposite side is not a vision of fascism. And this is the thing that is currently causing chaos in this country. This is the current thing that, if we don't get our arms around this, this is why people are worried about the republic tearing apart. This is why people are worried about civil war. Because if you don't have a verbalized vision, if you merely have an embodiment of a vision, then embodiment can be manipulated by folks who, let me go all Marxist here for just a second, own the means of production, of distribution.
Yep.
So how do we navigate this? And by the way, there's a tie into the World Cup here somewhere, but like, how do we How do we navigate around this as a country in order to preserve the republic that so many died to save?
I don't navigate around. I think you just go right through the middle. Like you just bust it up. So with take both Kennedy and King's greatest speeches. Um, they only had to be heard once. Back up 100 years, almost 100 years before Kennedy, President Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address. How many people heard it? Don't know. Wasn't that many? Wasn't 1,000? And yet epochal ramifications, right? And so I think that when you have the right quality vision, that thing, just like Jay-Z would love, it's only got to drop once. Bang, you're done. That's it. That's it. It drops once and you're done. I mean, coming down the stairs, right? Coming down the escalator, whatever, that drops once. Okay, you're good. But what's interesting is that for a vision, I believe there are at least three antecedents. You have to have a belief in a truth. You have to have the conviction that the truth matters. So that's an aspect of judgment. And then you have to have a burden to communicate it to other people. And when you have those three things, then you'll get a vision. And so it is easier to embody a vision than to actually well articulate and declare a vision. But I think it's politically lacking since President Reagan. But he did an excellent job both embodying and communicating, casting his vision, and it fundamentally changed America. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And we need that. And we need that in the next 2 years because, Americans we're notorious for having short memories, right? And so they could trot that woman back up on stage and people would say, oh, she looks nice. And they'll forget all of the train wreck from 2021 to 2025. They'll just forget it. And it's just like, but maybe that's them just pursuing their happiness. And I don't really think it is. I think that that's them, that someone is stoking their envy, that somebody is intentionally messing with the utilities so that they're getting a voter in an excited state. And it's just like, I don't know. I don't worry about civil war. I have more of a concern about the country fracturing without one, and then there not being the will to say, well, we're either going to stay a union or we're just going to kill you all. Like, I just don't think we have that will anymore. And so I have more of a concern with that. And again, like the road to serfdom and how I was talking about, with my Elijans sliding back to slavery because somebody is enabling your laziness not to show up and participate. So it's interesting. We have residential HOA in Arizona, and I hate residential HOA. I hate it. Is an abuse of the English common law system of owning property, which is one of the most beautiful inventions that humans have ever done, ever. And so I'll come back to this point because it was about a ruckus homeowners meeting that I was actually at and was at for 40 minutes and surrounded by a bunch of fellow angry property owners dealing with our, runaway HOA board. But I'm going to go back to, that comment that you made probably 40 minutes ago, like when you were when you're doing the steel man and playing devil's advocate for the young Marxist woman who would then say, well, but what would your ancestors have wanted? This, they want this property, this is what they want. This, okay, property and safety, let us do the rest. We're good. Property and safety. And so what lacked? Property or safety or both. And that was about it. That was about it. Even so you can deal with deficits in education. You can deal with deficits in capital. You cannot really deal with deficits in property, and you cannot really deal with deficits in safety. That's the government's job. Okay, protect the property, protect the lives, and then let us do the rest. And it works often enough. That's what they wanted. One of them used his rights to found a school for Negroes in North Carolina circa 1925 because there was a deficit there. And so he used his freedom and rights and property to fix it.
But look, Dorollo, one of the first principles of Marxism is to abolish private property.
Oh, of course it is. Everybody gets to ride in the limo. It becomes a big bus, right? Yeah, that's funny because I still see them in the back of the rolls and I'm in a bread line. No, no, not gonna happen. So that ruckus homeowners meeting, right? I
Yeah.
remember turning to my neighbor and saying, "Do you understand? You understand this is how our country got started, right? It was a bunch of angry property owners yelling at the HOA board that was foisted on them. And they said, we didn't elect you. Why are you here? You know, we didn't
So
elect you. Why are you here? Like,
so let
oh,
me
here. Why are you messing with how I can use my garage? That's not authorized by the covenants. And that, no, 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 no. Right.
I will. So let me give you
Classic.
a brief anecdote because my wife would absolutely agrees with you about HOAs, and this is why we moved out of our one house. It was in an HOA where
Mm-hmm.
we struggled massively um, to
Mm-hmm.
a house that has no HOA and significantly more land.
Yep.
So let me relate this small anecdote. I saw today that in another HOA community, in the city in which I live, in that community, the security chief of that HOA, which is a position with no police power, even though it says security and chief, apparently fined somebody $100 for a post on Facebook criticizing the individual inside of that community. And I thought, when I saw this, I thought, thank God I don't live in that community, because I'd be daring that security chief to show up and collect. I dare you to show up and collect. I'm not paying. If I'm up on my dues, I am following the covenants. If there's nothing written in the covenants about posting things on Facebook, which there won't be, who the hell are you? You talk about angry HOA. No, no. This is now the Patrick Henry, like, you come over here and you take it. You come right on over. You come right on over, collect your $100. You have no police power. So when you show up to collect your $100, or when you send me a strongly worded letter from your legal team, I will send you a strongly worded letter from my legal team daring you to show up and collect that $100. And by the way, good luck. Go ahead, apply interest, apply fines, apply penalties. You can't collect. And at a certain point, and I think about this in a much broader macro scale, one of the things that we're all struggling with as Americans is, from the HOA meeting that Dorollo was talking about, all the way to the thing that I saw, from an HOA community that I am not in, but that got me all riled up, and then I had to go outside and like deal with some things, and that like kind of cooled me off because it's like 110 degrees here in Texas. It's officially summer, um, you know, uh, with like 80% humidity. It's officially ridiculous. Um, um, the thing that we are all sensing, and this is the 80% of people who don't live in LA, Chicago, New York, the 80% of people live in the rest of the country. The thing we're sensing is, at a certain point, an average person in a republic has to stand up and say to the powers that be, no. And no, as my wife would say, is a full sentence. By the way, the no's are written into our Constitution. This is a good segue into the amendments. So there are amendments. The first 10 amendments, we talked about this. The first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. The structuring of the Bill of Rights came out of anti-federalist concerns about exactly what Dorollo and I are talking about. A small group of power-hungry people who will behave tyrannically, because that is what power-hungry people do, even with just a little bit of power, is they behave tyrannically. I don't care whether it's a small group of people in your HR department where you work, or a small group of people in the HOA board where you live. They will behave tyrannically, and there has to be checks. There has to be no's. There have to be lines, right? So the first 10 amendments are those lines. They were cobbled together from conversations, notoriously enough, ranging from Virginia all the way to New Hampshire, and even Massachusetts contributed some of these ideas to these amendments, and they were put together and drafted. So I'm not going to read all of the first 10 amendments. What I will give you are the highlights. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you the first two because they are the most important, I believe. Article 1, Congress shall make no law. That's an important thing to remember. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's Article 1. Article 2, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. By the way, I am now going to quote the Dave Chappelle joke. The Second Amendment is there in case that First Amendment stuff doesn't work out. And he is exactly correct, because, as another comedian has framed it, you're going to run your mouth. That's the First Amendment. And then you're going to need a gun. That's the Second Amendment. Because at a certain point, you're going to piss somebody off. Or you're going to get pissed off at somebody, and they're going to be equally armed, and now we can all negotiate on equal playing field. Article 3, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Article 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. By the way, we should be leaning on this article against the surveillance state that we're all got in our phones. Every time the FBI gets a subpoena for something in your phone, you should be screaming about Fourth Amendment violations. I'm going to go down a few and say, go to Article 6. In all criminal persecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state, not of their peers, of the state, and a district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with witnesses against him, and to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Nowhere in there does it say anything about the jury being his peers, which is why when a 15-year-old boy stabs another 15-year-old boy at a soccer game right up the road from me, he's not going to be judged by other 15-year-olds, but he will be judged by a jury. And of course, my favorite article, and the favorite article of all the states in these United States, the one that always gets rediscovered, right, with every election cycle, depending upon which way the wind blows, Article 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. What that means fundamentally is if California wants to go full-throated socialist, that's okay. Go right on ahead. If Florida wants to go full-throated, I don't know, capitalist and destroy their environment with weird non-regulations, they can do that. What that means is that if Arkansas wants to all of a sudden put up, I don't know, Bibles at every school, guess what? Arkansas can do that. And if Illinois says we don't want a Bible anywhere within our state and wants to purge all the Bibles, guess what? Federal government has absolutely no say in any of that. These are the first 10 amendments, and there are other ones in there. You should go back and read them, of the Bill of Rights. They are part of the concrete commitments that spring forth from the Declaration of Independence. And these arguments, these concrete commitments, sprang forth from people who were walking around in certain archetypes. And now we're going to talk about archetypes a little bit. We're going to talk about generational archetypes. There are certain types of people that are maybe more passive or more active than others. And generations tend to hold these people like a bucket. And so Dorollo talked about the 60s generation. It was part of the hero generation, right? All those hippies wanted to really be heroes. And that's why they marched, and that's why they protested. That's why they overthrew Jim Crow and overthrew bans on homosexuality. This is why they overthrew They tried to overthrow male-female relationships with feminism and with the questioning of the patriarchy. And of course, they tried to overcome them. They tried to overcome biology itself with the birth control pill and abortion. They're the hero generation. This is what heroes do. They go out and they try to make a stamp on the world. But the generation that came after them, the generation that both Dorollo and I are a part of, that's the nomad generation. The nomad archetypes wander the world looking for a place, looking for a purpose, looking for meaning and significance. It's no wonder that we are called the latchkey generation. Dorollo and I are at the tail end of that generation. My older sister is in the middle part of that generation. Everyone who I've ever met in that generation, male or female, are pugilistic, quite frankly, just fine with missing out, and don't really need to be liked. Oh, and by the way, we really like a good conflict, because guess what? That's how you discover things. As a nomad, you have to wander through things in order to make something happen. But you're not going to stage the revolution. You're just going to stir the pot a little bit. By the way, 35 of the 56 signatories of the Declaration of Independence were part of the nomad archetype. This is why I like this document. These are people speaking in my language. These are people talking about things and looking around going like Dorollo did at the HOA meeting, and like I do when I see nonsense on Facebook going, at what point is somebody going to say no? Oh, wait, I'm going to have to be the person to say no, and I'm going to be not liked? That's just fine with me. I'll get up and go to work tomorrow, or I won't. It'll be fine. While the vast majority of the leaders of the revolution that came after it and the architects of the US Constitution were the hero archetype. They were more like boomers, particularly young boomers, than they were like Gen Xers. These archetypes and the arguments that the founding generation adjudicated came about during the most significant seculum cycle in the West, outside of the time of the American Civil War during the long 19th century. And now, this is my question to Dorollo. We're going to turn the corner here. Now we are at America's 250th anniversary. And we have the nomad archetype in Gen X. We have the hero archetype in the millennial generation in positions of power, with the artist archetype coming up. That's Gen Z coming up. By the way, the artist archetype came after the Revolutionary War generation, and they were the ones who were most, shall we say, defined by Andrew Jackson, interestingly enough. How can leaders navigate, not even leaders, no. Let's ask a broader question than this. Dorollo, what do you think America is going to look like underneath that artistic archetype? Because the artistic archetype does really, really well in a seculum high, which again, we're birthing right now. Our seculum high is going to be defined, I think, by artificial intelligence. It's going to be defined by robotics and social media and everything we've learned from that over the last 25 years of chaos. It's going to be defined by TikTok videos and all the things that will come after TikTok. It's going to also be defined by the social struggles that we thought were so important being muted a little bit, particularly the social struggles around race. Maybe not necessarily class. I think that one will stick with us. I actually think most of the race and ethnic and religious stuff is going to get pushed up to class finally in America, which is why you do see the rise of socialism and the interest in that among the young artistic archetypes. Can the Republic, founded by people like you and I, or whose founding document was written by people whose mindset we would have understood and we would have gone along with, can a republic that's run by these artist archetypes and also being overseen by more of the heroic archetypes like the millennials who really want to be heroes, and they're finally, by the way, stepping onto the stage. I mean, JD Vance is a millennial. He's probably going to wind up either getting close to being president and maybe even winning that. AOC is also a millennial, and she's going to give all of them fits for a while. She's going to be around a long time. So into this mishmash of generational archetypes, right? We still have the Declaration. what does that look like moving forward? This is a far-flung idea, so I only want you to move forward maybe 25 years, but what do you see coming out of this?
Button. It basically is a conspiracy. When I go silent for too long, it just stops working. It's saying, Dorollo, just keep talking, just fill all the space, because then we work. And then when you stop talking, it's like, oh, he's gone. Boop. So the first thing I did is do the math. So in 25 years, that'd be 72. Woo.
Mhm.
Okay. I hope by that point we succeed in making the type of change in the expectation of the federal government, right? That persuades people that small state conservatism works, that you need less of a tax footprint because that's what everybody really wants. I mean, most of the people griping, what are you really paying in taxes? It's not that much, right? But we all get it. But shifting away from a big government has to do everything for you or you die to no, it really doesn't. But in my analysis of these multiple republics or versions of a quote republic, close quote, what I saw was, the need for a crisis that then produces constitutional change. And so what I'm looking for in that 25 years is, okay, but what is the crisis and what is the constitutional change it's going to provoke, And my preference is one that says that COVID overreach was crazy. I'm glad we're done with the crazy surveillance state, which we didn't need. Change the government so that never happens again. Great. And we go on with our lives, and we can form new institutions, institutions where it would be unimaginable that somebody, for example, would say, I'm going to fine you because of what you said. This is America. What are you talking about? Oh, and if you're in a public position or a quasi-public position, I mean, it's hard getting libel. It's hard getting that to lie as a cause of action because political speech is one of the most protected types of speech. But so why is somebody doing that? Maybe because across the pond, they're actually doing that with spades and arresting people. Oh, okay, maybe it's that. So America needs to be a place where that never happens, where you're free to be offensive and where people recognize that being offended is better than tyranny. So deal with being offended. So for me, it's like, okay, can we, who will be in our 70s in 25 years, if we're still alive, God willing, can we persuade these hero types to be heroes about small government, which it means reasonable, accountable, affordable. That's what it means. It doesn't mean insignificant. It actually means that is actually able to function to do its job. Think of how little time it takes for AI to tell you the answer. Right. That's small government. Little bit of time. Here's a good answer. Not, oh, we're going to take all day and take all this money and take all this time. Wait, why don't I have a response? Sorry, we're at lunch. We'll tell you when we get back from lunch. We'll tell you when we get back from vacation. How much vacation do you get? Oh, I work for the government. I get 3 months of vacation a year. What? Oh, okay. Right. No. So if we can succeed in helping hero generation that the American way, along with baseball, football, apple pie, whatever, is just reasonable government with light hands, that works most of the time. But frankly, that works in almost every middle class setting. You don't need much more than criminal law because people are doing for themselves. These property owners are doing for themselves. And, I saw a piece I haven't read yet. Just it's the title that caught my eye. It was about a Dutch people in Missouri who are experiencing the seductions of American suburbia for the first time. And they're just marveling at it. And it's like, because it works. It really works. You didn't think we were just a bunch of like skyscrapers and ghettos, did you? That's not,
Well, that's what
as you said, that's not at 80%. That is not the 80%. While I have the mic, I think that so I was looking at the dynamics of political parties because you said, okay, the Democrats are doing the things that Mao did, purge, ideological purge, back to physical, put people in camps to re-educate. or just kill them. It's a lot more efficient. That if you look at how our political parties grew, progressed, and died over time, it's interesting that for that super active part of the 19th century, you had multiple groupings of people, and the only real continuity was in the Democratic Party, right? Because by 1800, you had robust, it's either a Federalist or you're a Democrat, Republican, and that's it. Okay. But by 1832, it's Dems and Whigs. Okay. It's Dems and Whigs. Because Jackson had won the 2 elections previous, and then he was able to bequeath that to that native New Yorker, that native non-English speaker, Martin Van Buren, who spoke with an accent, right? Not an immigrant, spoke with an accent. There you go. Was able to bequeath that power, right? And so that was definitely Dems and Whigs. And then you had some alteration. Then you had Free Soilers, others, whatever. It was a whole salad bowl mess until 1860. And now you have GOP and Dems. Great. So how have they succeeded for the next, 166 years to still be there when you had progressives, when you had, you name it, just all coming out, but they've succeeded each time in keeping, for example, the segregationists coming out of the Democratic Party in 1948 from forming their own party, right? So my bet is that we will actually have the establishment of an actual third party. And what has happened in American history is that dynamic never lasts super long. What happens is one of the old guys is always displaced and then goes away. And so the Federalists got displaced, and then the Whigs came up, and then the GOP succeeded from them. But the GOP cobbled together like Free Soilers and some others from former Whigs because they went bust to then make the GOP great. And so if reasonable centrists who love immigration and think that people should be able to come here who aren't criminals could get their acts together, we could have a third party that's not socialists, right? Who say, look, here we go. This can work. Oh, well, where are their immigrants? This is America. Where are they not? Like, come on. This is 2026 in America. Where are they not? Let Benjamin Harrison V talk about it, okay? Because he was one of the signers of that document, a member of the Continental Congress, and literally Benjamin I was in government in Virginia, and the second and the third and the fourth, and he was the fifth. There was stable colonial government for more than a century, and that family had this massive experience with that, okay? And that is like 0.001% of the American experience. It's great, but there's no worry. We don't worry that Samoans come in and change how football works. We just bring them in because they're freaking good. They're really big and strong and good at playing football, and it works. So if we see that, and to borrow from G.K. Chesterton, right, the Englishman. And what I love about, and I'm wondering if it's actually true. In my head, one of the things I'm thinking about is that the referent, whose name is Gary Wills, happens to be a Catholic scholar and happens to be Catholic. And so he calls him Gilbert Chesterton, who was also, of course, Catholic. And I'm wondering if, is it just us Protestants who call him GK, like the Catholics call him Gilbert? But I don't know. Anyway, and of course, I'm in Arizona, so Gilbert is like 20 minutes from where I'm sitting. But anyway, I digress. He talked about how the great big melting pot, okay, the pot can't melt, right? The mold has to hold. So you can pour in all these different ethnicities, languages, religions, great, but the mold itself can't break or melt, or you have a massive problem. And he was correct. And so the NFL is a strong enough culture that Samoans, others come in and we get better football. We don't get rugby. We don't get a different game. And so for the immigration aspect, it's like, I don't think it needs to be feared as long as the mold holds. And there's certain, in my opinion, objective, measurable indicators that could tell us, is the mold likely to hold, or is it starting to sag? Like if you look across the pond again, you should look at the percentage of people in the UK in general and in London specifically who literally were living somewhere else in the world 20 years ago. It's mind-blowing It's so high. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's a problem. Don't want that. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about immigration. I'm not talking about unchecked mass migration of people who are going to show up and totally destroy the country. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people come from my wife's country, my wife's former country, here because they don't want to get blown up by Putin. And then they're off running and they're working, they're doing their things, they have their work papers, they're great, and they need support. They need somebody not saying, I'm just going to take your TPS away, which they're allowed to do. And I mean, that law is easy to understand. They're allowed to do. The secretary is set up to do that. So the Supreme Court decision from last week makes perfect sense. Okay. But I don't want the TPS gone. I don't want them being deported back to a war zone. I don't think that's what our country stands for. And so to me, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness disposes us, not just disposes us to be favorable towards the right kind of migration. It's in the document. It's in the text. He talked about it. It was one of the grievances against King George III, that you're frustrating immigration laws so that we can't get people showing up to do colonization. Because as you know, colonization is one of the oldest human activities. It's been done on every continent by every color of person. And so it is not some white conspiracy. It is not racist. No, colonization is human behavior. It's people show up and do humanness. That's what colonization is. That's it. That's it. That's it. You know, one of the most successful colonizations in human history. Look at Africa. Look at sub-Saharan Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Bantu started on like the highlands of Cameroon and East Nigeria and literally spread and covered a continent that is much bigger than North America. Much bigger. Covered it in like 2,000 years. Boom. There you go. And so you have people genetically related and languages that are related to each other, and like this triangle that goes from Senegal over to Sudan and then goes down to South Africa and everything in that little box. That triangle, right? That's the Bantu colonization. It's phenomenal. You understand that they went from stone to iron? There was no bronze. There was no shining, glorious Achilles, which I like because I love the Greeks, love all that, but there was no bronze. It was a get to the point, stone to iron. Stone to iron, right, done. And it's just like that's humans being humans. It's colonization. It's awesome. Anyway,
So, okay. So I guess maybe the fundamental.
72 years old.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we succeeded with our project, Jesan, that the millennials and Z and Alpha, and no one's going to be called Generation Beta. They just ain't going to accept
No,
it.
they
Generation Charlie, whatever they're going to be called. Okay. And I don't even know what sex Charlie is right now, but Generation Charlie that comes after Alpha. Okay. I'm less concerned about them than did I do my kids? And by the way, you know there's another one coming, right?
Finding out today, but okay, welcome to the show. There you go. No, I did not. Congratulations.
To my kids, right? Am I bequeathing to them a kingdom and a kingdom? Okay, a small K and a big K. Am I bequeathing to them a kingdom where they can do these things and live out their rights and help their neighbors and work, all of which works in a capitalist system? You don't need any of that in a socialist system, and you can't frankly do it in a socialist system. So don't want that. You can do all that. Support your neighbors, do whatever. Look at the Amish. Look at the Amish. They're one of the strongest, they have some of the greatest adherence as a community and in a set of interrelated communities ever, let alone right now in America. And it functions really well. They function really well. And what are they asking for support? They're not saying, get away from me, leave me alone, and let us do our thing. We are able to reproduce over centuries peaceful, fecund, F-E-C-U-N-D, culture. And I think it's brilliant. And a hat tip to Wendell Berry, because that's where I learned that. I had seen Amish. I learned about them from Wendell Berry, and it's like, wow, that's actually really profound. But I'm hoping that I bequeath them small K kingdom, and then of course, being a Christ follower, big K kingdom, that they're actually chasing this thing and exercising their rights of a higher citizenship to be able to sacrificially love and show the people here, hey, by the way, this is great, but this is still fallen. There's something coming that will never be shaken. And as a gift, you can enter as a prince, or you can stay a punk and be out. And then when the real judge shows up, he'll deal with you. You know, cue to making one of those Obama faces right now.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yep. When the
Well,
real judge shows up, he's gonna deal with y'all.
I
Yep.
can't think of a better way maybe to close out our episode today.
Oh,
First
I
off by
can.
thanking. First off by
I can.
thanking.
Oh, I
Go
can.
ahead. Go ahead.
Ready?
Go ahead. Go ahead. You want to do it or you want me to do
Jefferson. I'll
it?
give you Jefferson.
You're gonna give me
Okay.
Jefferson. Okay.
And that as free and independent states, they have the power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Our sacred honor.
Yep.
And they meant it.
Oh, yeah.
And they meant it.
Their lives.
I would like to thank Dorollo Nixon Jr. for coming on this episode today, where we talked about the Declaration of Independence and what it means for America at 250 years old. Congratulations on Dorollo and his wife for their new baby. Congratulations to them.
On the way.
Coming. On the way. Coming.
Oh, yeah,
New baby coming. All right, on the way. Coming into a new birth of liberty, right?
Yes.
Coming into a republic.
Yep.
And with that, well, we're out.